The old stone walls of the abbey were cold even in the springtime. A thin wind slipped through the high, narrow windows, carrying the scent of rain and damp earth. The air inside smelled faintly of candle wax and old wood, the kind of smell that clung to places where centuries seemed to sleep in the stones. In that dim, echoing space, Eleanor sat on the edge of a carved wooden bench, hands folded tightly in her lap. She was 17 years old, though the shadows under her eyes and the way her shoulders curled forward made her seem older. The white linen veil draped over her hair was stiff with starch, and every movement of her head made it rustle against her ears. She was waiting for her future. And her future had just walked in. The heavy door swung open with a groan. A figure stepped inside, filling the space with a different kind of presence, loud without making a sound. He was a large man, broad in the shoulders with a round, flushed face framed by a thick beard the color of dark chestnut. His tunic was made of deep red wool, the fabric stretched slightly at the seams, and a heavy green cloak hung around him like the shadow of a forest. His eyes, small but bright, settled on her immediately, and a smile spread across his face. The abbess had called him Lord Bartram. He was to be her husband. Eleanor's father had arranged it. Not because he wanted her to be happy, but because Lord Bartram had land, fields, sheep, men who would work them. It was said he could be generous when he chose, but also that his temper was quick, like dry straw meeting a spark. Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap. She wanted to stand and step back, but her feet stayed rooted to the flagstones. "Eleanor," the abbess said softly from behind her, "stand and greet your husband-to-be." Her stomach felt like a fist. Slowly, she rose. Lord Bartram's smile widened. "Ah," he said, his voice deep and rolling, "so this is the little dove I've heard so much about." He stepped forward, and his shadow fell over her. He took her hands in his, broad, warm, and calloused, and held them with a grip that was almost too strong. His eyes sparkled, but not in the way a child's might when they find something precious. It was more like the glint of light on a knife's edge, bright, sharp, and not entirely safe. "You'll make a fine wife," he said. "A fine wife indeed." She forced herself to smile, but it felt as though her lips were made of wax. Life in the Middle Ages was not built for soft hearts. Marriages were not made from love. They were built like stone walls, hard, practical, and meant to last whether the people inside them were happy or not. Women were not asked if they wanted to marry. They were told. Eleanor knew this. She had seen it happen to others. But knowing and living were two different things. The first days after the betrothal were filled with preparations. Her mother oversaw the sewing of her wedding gown, ivory wool with narrow sleeves, trimmed with lace that had been saved for years. The gown was lovely, but wearing it felt like stepping into someone else's life. At night, she lay awake in her small bed, staring at the ceiling beams while the wind rattled the shutters. She thought about her old life, about working in the herb garden with her sister, about the way the sun fell warm through the kitchen door in the afternoons. Soon, she would leave all of that behind. The wedding took place on a cool morning under a pale sky. The church smelled of damp stone and rosemary. Eleanor's veil fell heavy over her face, muting the light, blurring the faces of the people gathered. The priest's voice was steady, the Latin words rolling like a low tide, but she barely heard them. When it was done, Lord Bartram lifted her veil and kissed her cheek. His beard scratched her skin, and his breath smelled faintly of wine. By evening, they were in his home, a manor house with thick walls, narrow windows, and the scent of smoke from a great hearth that never went out. Servants hurried about, carrying baskets of bread, pitchers of ale, and platters of roasted meat. The hall echoed with voices, laughter, and the clatter of cups. Through it all, Lord Bartram kept a hand on her arm or her shoulder, as though reminding her that she belonged to him now. At first, Eleanor tried to make peace with her new life. She learned the routines of the manor, when to oversee the kitchen, how to greet the visiting tenants, when to keep silent. She tended the small chapel garden and mended clothes by the fire. But Lord Bartram's moods were like the weather, calm one moment, storming the next. He was loud in his happiness, quick to laugh, but his laughter sometimes made her uneasy. When he was displeased, his voice could cut through a room like an axe splitting wood. The hardest part was the way the walls seemed to close in on her. She could no longer walk to the village when she pleased. She could no longer visit her sister without permission. Freedom, she learned, was not a thing easily regained once it was given away. One afternoon in late autumn, Eleanor sat by the small window in her chamber, sewing a tear in one of Bartram's shirts. Outside, the trees bent under the weight of the wind. The sky was the color of pewter. A knock came at the door. When she opened it, she found one of the servants, a girl not much younger than herself. The girl's face was pale. "My lady," she whispered, "the master is in the hall. He's been drinking since morning." Eleanor's stomach tightened. She thanked the girl and went down the narrow stairs. Lord Bartram sat at the head of the long table, a cup of ale in one hand. His eyes were bright, his smile wide. "There's my wife," he boomed when he saw her. He beckoned her over, his meaty hand gesturing with a kind of forced cheer. She walked toward him, each step heavy. When she reached his side, he took her hands in his, gripping them tightly. "You'll stand by me, won't you, Eleanor?" he said, his voice loud enough for everyone in the hall to hear. "Through thick and thin. You'll be my good wife." The servants glanced at each other, unsure if they should keep working or slip away. Eleanor felt the strength in his grip, the way it held her like an iron clasp. She nodded, her throat dry. "That's what I thought," he said, grinning. The room felt warmer than it should have, the fire's heat pressing against her back. She could feel her heart beating hard in her chest. That night, she sat awake long, after the candles had burned low. She thought about the life she had imagined when she was younger, a life where marriage meant partnership, where love was the root of the home. She understood now why so many women faded into quiet shadows after their wedding day. It wasn't that they wanted to disappear. It was that the world had given them no other way to survive. But Eleanor was not ready to become a shadow. The gentle twist came not with shouting, but with silence. Winter arrived, and with it a heavy snow that buried the fields and quieted the manor. Lord Bartram grew restless, pacing the hall, complaining about the cold and the empty stores of ale. Eleanor, however, found a kind of peace in the stillness. She began visiting the chapel each morning, kneeling in the cold to pray. She prayed not for deliverance, but for strength. She tended the small garden even in frost, planting hardy winter herbs, and slowly she began to win small freedoms, not by asking for them, but by taking them quietly. A walk to the edge of the field under the pretense of gathering kindling. An afternoon in the kitchen helping the servants bake bread. Letters sent to her sister, carried by a trusted hand. Lord Bartram never noticed, or if he did, he said nothing. By spring, Eleanor was different. Not louder, not bolder, but steadier. The fear that had once made her hands tremble began to fade. She learned that survival was not always about winning or escaping. Sometimes it was about bending without breaking, finding pockets of light in the shadows. She knew she would never love her husband in the way she had dreamed. But she could still love her own life in the quiet ways that belonged to her alone. Years later, when people spoke of her, they said Eleanor was a woman of calm grace, one who ran her household with a steady hand. They did not know about the girl who had once sat trembling on a wooden bench, waiting for her future to arrive. They did not know that in the Middle Ages marriage could be a cage, and that the trick to surviving was not to rattle the bars, but to find the sunlight that slipped between them.